shadow traffic redirection. We took a copy of our incoming request stream, like which customer visited us and what they asked for, and we made a duplicate copy and sent it to the cloud and ran it over there, and then ignored what came back. Right? So we're just burning CPU cycles in the cloud. We're not getting any value out of it, but what we are doing is we're stress testing it, we could debug it, we could find what the latency for these requests was, and we could start tuning them up and figuring out where stuff was broken. And since we'd written a lot of this code from scratch, since it was this newly cleanly layered architecture, this was how we basically battle tested our largely a new code base by running alongside the old code base. First phase, send and forget. Second phase is get the result back and compare it and see if it makes sense. And the third phase, you could actually build tests, side-by-side tests, where you feed some customers data center results and some customers cloud results, and do an A/B test to make sure that nothing bad happened in there. It'll quit or start calling customer service or something. So that's kind of what you can do if you're doing redirect. This was kind of something that I beat into the developers. They were kind of reluctant to do it. And then after we'd done it, and there was some we were really, really glad we did this. And it was a pain up front. Why are we doing this again? But we were extremely glad we did it. This is one of the reasons why the iPhone launch worked properly, because we absolutely stress tested that back end at a very high level. Okay, next. So this is kind of just a map. It was very simple because it was one request per visit. This is an API call that comes in that gets the stuff that you're going to throw on the TV, or chooses all the movies you're going to put on the TV. So we just ran through that and then ignored what came back, basically. But all it needed was the video metadata and like a queue service that told you what that customer had in its queue. Okay, next. And then the next thing we did was the web pages. So the first web page we did was the stars page. And so this is the first one where you'd see movies.netflix.com/something. And one of the nice things about this is a genre page, but it has no subgenres. It's just the list of movies we got from the Stars channel. And because it has no subgenres, there's a whole bunch of code that doesn't need to be there, so it's the simplest page we could find that was non-trivial. So we rewrote this whole thing. It looks the same as the Netflix data center page from a UI perspective, but it's completely rewritten from the ground up. It's new JavaScript, it's struts 2 based, it's nice and clean. We took out a whole bunch of old crufty stuff. So that took a lot of work to come up with just the very first page. But again, it was a cleanup. There's a little bit of personalization on that, a little bit of filtering and sorting, but it doesn't need that much. It actually, even if you don't personalize it at all, it still works as a page because you've still got the movies on it. Generally, we sort movies based on your personal preferences and things like that. So every page on Netflix is personalized. We invented this new cookie type that had the information the cloud needed so that we didn't have to go back to the data center to figure out who you were all the time. It's got an encrypted block of data in it, which we decrypt to figure out what we need to know. And then this new front-end type, like I said, movies.netflix.com. Well, what we found was a lot of latency issues. So this started off significantly slower than the same page in the data center. But once we'd added enough memcached to it, it ended up faster than the same page in the data center. So that was by meeting one of our goals. Okay, next. So this is kind of what it looks like. There's multiple requests per visit because there's maybe 1,000 movies in this category, and we show about 40 per page, and you hit next, 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 next. So we store the full list in memcached, and then the pagination is just hitting memcached on the subsequent pages as you're zipping back and forth through the genre. The first time you visit, we generate the list. It's standard pagination cache stuff, but it was our first use of memcached, which is a very simple use. It's ephemeral. If you lose it, it doesn't matter. All those kind of nice, simple features. If it happened to not be working, everything still works anyway. So those are the kinds of things you want to look for the very first thing you do in the cloud. And keeping it as simple as you could possibly be. We then have this controlled transition. So there's code in the page which renders the URL for whatever page you clicked on. So that behind each click there is a URL, and that URL is generated for you. And in the data center, we can control the code control that URL so the proportion of customers get it pointing to the cloud and a proportion don't. When we generate the URL that's in the page, because all the pages are dynamically generated, right? So the trick here is that we can switch the cloud on and off, we can send 1% to it and then 10% and all that kind of stuff. And the page you started off looking at, the home page, is in the data center, but some of the links are pointing at the cloud for some people. And you can also, well, there's this corner case that would be really difficult to render in the cloud. Well, detect it and don't send that guy, right? So if any customer that looked remotely complicated or difficult or was in a test cell for some reason or had on a weird subscription or something, just don't do it. So it means that you can simplify all your corner cases out. And if somebody lands in the cloud that shouldn't be there, you redirect them back to the data center. That's a very straightforward technique, but it worked really well. There's a few other things we had to do. The play buttons, the things that modify on that page are actually data center URLs. So when you hit a rating, it's actually poking the data center to start with, and then eventually the rating system moves into the cloud, and that URL now points at the cloud version of it. So URLs are good, they point at things, so use that. Okay. So let's talk a bit about developers next. So you can move code to the cloud, but you have to get developers oriented around it. And we did this thing, my manager thought of this. He said, sort of interesting managers at Netflix, they push you, right? It's one of those things where my memory of being, I used to be at Sun for a long time, and it's like the engineers and architectural trying to drag management into the future, and at Netflix, it's the other way around. The management are the most aggressive at getting stuff done, and the engineers, can I just finish this code? No, I need something new, right? So it's sort of the other way around. So I said, well, we're going to gradually, incrementally get to the cloud and figure stuff out. My boss said, why don't you just take everyone, put them in a room for a day and have a boot camp? Oh, what's that look like? Let's do it next Thursday. Okay, well, challenge for me. So I was managing the team. I had a team of about 7 or 8 people at the time, and I borrowed about 5 people from other teams, and we ended up about 20 people in a room for approximately a day or 2. And we built from scratch in the cloud a very simple website out of completely new code. We didn't use any data center code, and everyone had to learn how to put stuff in the cloud, how to write code, how to deal with these NoSQL things in the back end, and it was just an immersion thing. We spent some time explaining, we did a bit of prep work building out some base types and some base infrastructure, and we debugged a whole lot of stuff. We had some very primitive early versions of our tools for deploying instances. We got those going. So there was, what we ended up with wasn't usable as you could log into it and see movies, but the only 20 users it knew about were the people that were in the room to start with. We weren't actually connecting to our back-end customer system. We just had a little simple DB database with 20 entries in it. But it worked very well as a bootstrapping for the engineers. And then a few other things. When you're dealing with the cloud, you have to set up these keys to do anything, and it's really annoying. And you have to configure Eclipse, and it's just like one of those things that's really difficult to get right. And a lot of people, the first thing they have problems with when they're trying to do any cloud-related development work is to get the keys right. So just, if you're getting into this, think this through, document it well, and give a bit of bootstrapping support for people in that area in particular. And then the other problem is that people tend to reinvent things because they don't know somebody else has already done it or they're already working on it. So when you're doing this very rapid stuff, you need a place where you can say, okay, I've started building this, and okay, here's the final version. And whenever you want something, you go and look at the list and go, okay, I can use that.